The Winnipeg Jets have a lot of great prospects, but what about the guys who are flying under the radar? Who are Winnipeg's wildcards, and can they help Winnipeg win a Stanley Cup in the future?
You're Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you enjoy what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. If you're still listening, obviously, you are probably thinking about the future of the Winnipeg Jets. You know, the Winnipeg's offseason has kind of kicked in, and you are probably wondering how the Jets are going to rally from what was a pretty crushing loss to the Dallas Stars. The Western Conference continues to shift around. A lot of teams are counting on a mixture of veterans and youth, and the Winnipeg Jets haven't really done that same thing. They've had a couple of young guys break into the team. We've seen some rookies in the past couple of seasons, but how many do you recall really sticking? Last episode, we talked about Winnipeg's top 10 skater prospects and tried to rank them in rough tiers to where you could figure out if they might project to be an NHLer or are they sort of on the fringes. Now, tonight, we want to focus on the wildcard prospects. These are the guys who either don't have as much footage out there and as many scouting reports available. Maybe they have some real cosmetic blemishes in their stats profiles, or there's just something about them that hasn't quite clicked in their respective leagues, and you're waiting for them to maybe take that next step. To start off, obviously, we have a couple of different categories, right? So the first is Winnipeg. Obviously, Winnipeg used to be known as Winnipeg back when we drafted Laine and guys like Vesalainen, and things have kind of quieted down since then, but the Jets do still have a fairly decent number of Finns, some of whom are relatively highly rated. The Jets also have some collegiate prospects, though, for reasons you can probably guess, it ain't many. Finally, we've got a couple of late bloomers, right? Maybe some players in Manitoba who came out of nowhere after really struggling and suddenly looked more like they might want some NHL ice time in the next couple of years. But first, let's stop in Finland. The Jets have a couple of interesting kids out there and some older players. The first one that I want to talk about is Markus Leponen. He is probably one of the weirder and sort of harder to gauge prospects in Winnipeg's system. He's a center who can play as a winger. And for Team Finland, the World Juniors teams, he usually has a decent stat sheet coming out of one of these tournaments. Whether he's playing for the under-20 team or something, he's usually had, 6-7 points in a few games. And so, you think, oh, well, if he's doing well with the Finnish team, he must surely be translating that success somewhere else. Well, he spent the first year with the Victoria Royals this season, racked up around 44 points in 65 games. And it was an interesting year because when I look at some of the ways that he scores and some of the footage, I have a hard time getting a real read on his shifts, right? There's a version of him where he's very smart driving towards the net. He's got great hand-eye coordination. And when you look at his passing, it's clearly very good. He's got great vision, and I feel like his spatial awareness is pretty great. There's real offensive talent there. And then there are also shifts where I just feel like I don't notice him at all. The thing with Leponen that sticks out is that I need more assertiveness from him. He has moments where you'll see it, but I don't see it consistently enough to feel super confident that he projects to be a really decent pro-level player. He could eventually make it to the Moose and really start to shine. And, bear in mind, this is his first year in North America. So I'm not really going to read too much into this first season. He's only 18. And, it's his first year on NA ice. He's previously been playing in the junior ranks in Finland. And, he's had some deployments for the Finnish youth teams. So, this first year, I think, is just getting comfortable in North American ice, getting used to the world, the juniors game, and certainly gaining some WHL experience. I don't know where he'll start to grow over the next couple of seasons. I'm curious to see if he can maybe make the jump out of the W a little faster. Obviously, he's got a couple of years to wait, but he's an interesting prospect, right? I'm curious about him. He skates relatively okay-ish. I need to see him use it more. I need to see him really start to control play more. He doesn't have that crazy explosiveness that I think a lot of other young prospects do. And so right now, I kind of class him as a wild card. I don't quite know what to make of him yet, but he's got some potential, and I would keep an eye on him more for like the next 3 to 4 years. I don't think he's anywhere, close to being ready to make any sort of jump. This again, he's really, really young. He just is a relatively fresh draft pick. So don't get too hyped up for him just yet. But over the next couple of years, keep an eye on him. If he starts to really grow that offensive instinct that I know he has, I think he could become a very intriguing player. Hopefully, to really help Winnipeg's skill down the middle. They don't have as many great out-and-out scorers and creators as they do on the wings. And so Leponen, as 6'1", relatively decent-sized forward who can help man the middle with some good stick handling and hand-eye with a great shot would be really, really helpful. So hopefully he can make it. The next two wild cards, I kind of debated whether I wanted to include them just because, in my mind, they're not really prospects in the traditional sense. But I do think, given how the Jets are and how their system is, we're going to include them. They are wild cards in my mind. And one of them I mentioned earlier, it's Christian Vesalainen. Now, Vesa is not a player that I've really given a ton of thought to lately, but with the Jets having a lot of departures, including likely Ehlers, possibly Mason Appleton, Rasmus Kupari just announced that he's signed in Switzerland. We'll talk about the implications of that on tomorrow's episode, but suddenly you're starting to realize that Winnipeg's depth chart maybe has a few more vacancies. And Vesalainen left on not great terms with Winnipeg, but he's now in a system that, has generally been pretty supportive of him. He's been doing well in HIFK this past season. He was about a point per game in Finland, which on his team, he was like top 7 in scoring, so not amazing, but he is wearing the A, and he's a sizable winger with a great shot. And so, if you're looking for a guy who could potentially compete for a bottom 6 role with Winnipeg, but not like a forechecking one, genuine skilled goal scoring and tertiary offense, maybe you can find out if he'd be open to returning for a camp spell, right? I don't know what his game is like at this point in terms of how it translates to North America. His Liga numbers aren't crazy, but they're respectable. He's 26. He's got good size and skating, very smooth skating. That hasn't left him. And he's got a pretty nasty release. If he's open to coming back and giving it another shot under a coach who I think honestly would give him a much fairer shake than maybe Maurice ever did, I would be intrigued by it. He's got dual wing ability. He can play on either side, whether it's his offhand or his dominant hand. And again, he's got a great release. He's a strong skater, and he doesn't usually let himself get as pushed around. So I think his last deployment, with the Jets was very misunderstood. I think that they tried to make him into a power forward, and it just really wasn't his game. So, if he wants to compete again, why not? He's a free prospect in your system. You've got his rights. Maybe see if he can give you something a little more. The last guy, obviously, is Ville Heinola. All I'll say about Heinola is that I'm still a fan of him. I still think that he can be a really solid either second pairing or third pairing puck-moving defender. I think his ability to control the puck and make really clean, quick breakout passes when paired with the right partner would be invaluable for this team. But I know the Jets don't see it that way because he's smaller. He actually plays bigger than his size in some ways, but I know that doesn't always matter when you see him maybe not winning the net front battles as much, or perhaps he doesn't hit as hard in the corners. And so at some point, I think they're going to just have to cut him loose and let him find traction elsewhere. And maybe he never does. But with Heinola, I do think some team out there is going to recognize that he still has some untapped potential and that he could be a really effective two-way blue liner for whatever you're looking for, maybe past your first and second pairing. So hopefully it happens with the Jets, but given how Winnipeg is and how Arniel kind of didn't maybe tell the truth about his actual assessment of him, I have a hard time seeing it being in Winnipeg, but curious to know If any of these Finns stand out to you, would you be willing to give Vesalainen another chance? Do you think Leponen might have some untapped potential? Or do you think Heinola might finally get a real look this season? Drop your thoughts about Winnipeg below. In a little bit, I also want to chat about the Collegiate kids because there's one in particular who stands out that I think has a really decent chance of becoming an NHLer at some point. And boy, oh boy, does he play a position of need for the Winnipeg Jets. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. And they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller for longer. Now, as a Marylander, I like the shelled variety. Cracking them open is a lot like cracking open a crab, and well, I guess meat is protein, so a Wonderful Pistachio might as well be a little protein punch as well. Very similar, maybe not from the sea, but certainly a similar concept. But a lot of you are on the go, right? You want something before your gym workout, maybe something to battle that 3 p.m. slump, or something to just snack on while you're dropping your kids off at school. They have a no-shelled variety. It comes in some great flavors. And of course, you can be confident that Wonderful Pistachios is a complete protein, providing all 9 essential amino acids. Get snacking and get cracking with a snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's show as we are talking about our wildcard prospects. And as I mentioned earlier, these are folks who, for one reason or another, either don't have a lot of information out there about how they're doing beyond some stats readouts, maybe some highlight footage, something along those lines. And so it's a little bit harder to get a read on how they're performing. In the collegiate ranks, the Jets don't have a lot of guys, mind you. Winnipeg has 2, though, and one of them I'm a little more confident in becoming an NHLer than the other. Let's start off with a guy who's a little bit of a bigger reach, though. Zach Nearing. Nearing has been playing for Western Michigan for a couple of seasons now, and he's or actually just finished his first season recently and was playing previously with Sioux Fall. And Nearing, he's a big winger with a lanky frame, got a fairly decent shot. I would say that was probably one of the bigger things with him is that, he tends to have this ability to find softer spaces and use a really solid release to get into good scoring positions. He's hard to get the puck off of him and tends to use his frame fairly well, right? He's not the fastest skater, and I think that did kind of show up during training camp. For a 6'3" guy, finding that extra layer of speed and acceleration from a standstill, I don't think is quite as easy for him. Nearing, he is an intriguing one just because there aren't a lot of wingers that have his particular size and are also really good at finding soft spaces and losing themselves between defenders. But that was kind of Nearing's old stats profile and scouting profile. Since joining Western Michigan, he had a fairly productive season. I would say it's relatively decent for a mid-round pick. You're looking at a guy posting 30 points in 40-ish games for NCAA production. It's not bad, right? Western Michigan, I don't think, has a crazy offense either. So, he tends to have a pretty balanced tool set, and he was in the top 6 for scoring for this team. Generally speaking, there are other players on this roster that were really good and really have helped push that team a little bit further into competitiveness. But in terms of Nearing's own contributions, he's solid middle of the pack production, and so I'm curious to know, now that he's had a year playing against guys who are maybe in the I guess closer to the adult tier. Where might his game go next, right? Will he come into camp looking really strong? Will he look like a player who's had, a good NCAA season, even if it wasn't crazy? Will he have improved skating and acceleration? I think the skating for me was probably one of the bigger things that I thought was maybe holding him back a bit. I'd also say that in terms of like a lot of high-end technical skill, he doesn't necessarily have that. But again, I think he's a really solid prospect. He's got a lot of NHL prospects around him on this team, and a lot of them have been doing pretty decently. He's been doing okay, so I'm curious to see, again, if he takes that next step this season, maybe we start to have a little bit of a different conversation. I think he's probably more Moose bound at some point if he doesn't just become a free agent. And obviously the whole FA thing with NCAA players, hard to get a sense of what his own perspective is, but he is from North Dakota. I could see him being amenable to joining the Jets, and maybe he can become like a decent, third or fourth line guy. Winnipeg getting a guy who's strong on the puck, who's got smart scoring instincts and can find the softer spaces. You really couldn't hate that, especially if you can develop him internally, right? Finding these guys and not having to pay additional cash or draft assets outside of the pick would be pretty ideal. The player who I'm a little higher on, though, and who I technically class as a wild card just because, again, it's harder to find some of the shift-by-shift stuff. Big thanks to the Jets Prospect YouTube for continually posting a lot of those shift-by-shift feeds if you're looking for those and ever want to see who's kind of out there and how they're doing on a more micro detail level. They've been doing some really hard work gathering footage. And Garrett Brown might be one of the more interesting players in Winnipeg's pool. He's like a 6'3" right-handed defender. And, he's for Denver playing a pretty pivotal role now that he's been able to have a healthier season. Obviously, Denver went, deeper into the playoffs this year. And Garrett stood out to me because he plays both a simple but also very skilled game, right? In some of the footage that I was finding from him, it seems like he has a keen sense of timing. So you'll see him sort of operate along the perimeter, especially along the blue line. And what stood out first off is that his lateral movement and skating seems to be pretty decent, right? He's a big kid, and sometimes that can be hard to get that frame rolling. We know watching Logan Stanley at 6'7", it is very hard for him to get up to speed and pivot quickly. But Brown seems to be shifting his skates and positioning pretty effectively. It allows him to relatively turn quickly when he's marking somebody in front of goal. He'll contest, the sticks pretty efficiently, and he seems to be able to turn pretty quickly and face the play at a reasonable pace, right? He's not going to have as many moments where he gets turnstiled. Once the play is kind of moving in the other direction, he's a fairly smooth skater. I don't think that he has ridiculously fast top-end pace, but when he's at the opposing blue line and starts to drop below the face-off circles, he does have an extra gear to him, and that's where it starts to get really intriguing. Kind of like Samberg really started offensively activating this season, Brown kind of has some of those same traits. And in a lot of ways, you can kind of see some parallels in his game and maybe why the Jets made this pick. Brown kind of has some Dylan Samberg in him. And if that's what the Jets are able to find on the right side, that would be a tremendous coup. Again, I'm not sitting here saying that Brown is likely to become somebody on Samberg's level. Samberg is an elite left-sided defender, and had the Jets not had Morrissey already, Dylan would be our number one. And I really don't think that there'd be any question about it. He is outstanding. He is one of the best shutdown blue liners and two-way players on this team. And without him, it was very noticeable. So if the Jets can find that for the right side, and that's what Brown becomes, that is fantastic. Now that he's had a full year with Denver, his offensive numbers haven't exploded, but he did post a career high 8 points in 40-ish games. That's pretty reasonable for a guy who's generally thought of as a two-way defender and maybe not jumping in scoring goals directly himself, but is contributing offensively elsewhere. I feel like he started to take a few more shots, and again, where he's starting to park himself and how he chooses to activate and sort of overload the strong side with the puck, I find interesting. It feels like something that could very much translate to how the Jets like to pressure and create waves of offense. But again, he also knows when to be smart and not push the advantage a little too aggressively. He'll be conservative when he needs to at the blue line and just make some clean, simple breakout passes, maybe some simple lateral passes to keep the cycle game going inside the zone, or a stretch pass if the team's pushing up through the neutral zone. I have a lot of time for him, and I've kind of had my eye on Brown for a while now. I'm curious to know what happens with him as he kind of starts to near the end of his Denver tenure. He's still fairly new to that team, so I wouldn't read too much into it just yet. But I'm pretty excited about him. I think he is a serious prospect to keep an eye out for. Had we not had Salamanson, he might honestly be one of our best right-sided defensive prospects. Even with Salo, I kind of feel like Brown already qualifies for that. partly because we don't have that many to begin with, but also because Garrett's just really good, and I don't really see a lot of people talking about him. So I'm very intrigued. I think he's a little more than just a wild card for me, but until we kind of get a better sense of what he sees his future in and where he wants to go, I'm keeping him a little more to the periphery and a little further down the road. But if you're looking for a guy who could become the next Dylan Samberg, this is your guy, and I am very excited to see what he does if he becomes a Winnipeg Jet in the future. Now, the last group of players I want to talk about, we've had a couple of players in Manitoba who sort of were maybe on the perimeter of conversations, more so because it looked like they were really struggling and not going anywhere. But suddenly, maybe one or two of these guys really started to take off, and perhaps there is something to their game that could translate to a future NHL role. We'll talk about what I would like to call the late bloomers coming right up in a brief moment. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's show as we're wrapping up on our wild card prospects with some thoughts on a couple of guys who, in a lot of ways, I've kind of thought were on the outs of Winnipeg's prospect pool, not because they're going to get cut or something, but Manitoba's offense this past season really took a nosedive. And I was really hoping that some of these players, Fabian Wagner and Danny Jokin in particular, were going to help the team elevate some of that scoring prowess. But both really had tough seasons, especially for, I would say, the first 25, 30 games. Jokin, the struggles have kind of continued. Last year, he really didn't have as much time to get, accustomed to his first pro season, thanks to some injuries. And this year, things didn't really take as much of a step forward as I was hoping. His points production remains pretty marginal. And, again, the Moose have a terrible offense. You could have like 35 or 40 points and probably be the top scorer for the team this past season. So by those merits, he didn't have the worst season. But I just thought Wagner and Jokin both were going to have bigger years than they did. And then the last couple of weeks rolled around for the Moose, and suddenly Wagner went on like this ridiculous goal-scoring streak that everyone loved, and Jokin started to find a little bit more offensive consistency. It felt like he was getting into the blue paint area a little more effectively, seemed like some points were starting to gravitate towards him a little more often. Just the kind of stuff that maybe our small details plays, maybe they get him a little more engaged. With him, I don't really expect there to be crazy amounts of offense, but you look at his Guelph days, and there was more to his game, especially in the ways that he could do those sort of tiki-taka passing plays, and had an eye for a pretty decent shot, right? And it didn't seem like he was able to translate as much of that to the Moose ranks. Maybe now that he's had, a fuller season and he can hopefully arrive at a stronger Moose team this coming year, maybe this is when he'll finally start to put two and two together. I still think that there's a guy in there who could become Winnipeg's bottom six center dynamo. He's defensively pretty responsible. He can, do some real good special teams work, and he's got a nice shot. I think it's pretty underrated. And again, because he has such a well-rounded tool set, I've got a lot of time for him. So I just really root for him. Jokin seems like a really nice guy. You always hear about some of the charity and foundation work that he does. And, he's always been very positive about his experience with Winnipeg. Obviously, it's been a tougher one the past year or so just because things haven't quite fallen into place. But I do have some hope for him. So keep an eye out for Jokin. Let's see if this year is a little more successful. The guy who I think everyone's kind of been talking about and has really buzzed because of his goal-scoring exploits towards the end of the season, Fabian Wagner. Now, I'll say right off that I don't quite know what his game is going to be this coming year. Wagner obviously had a pretty successful run in Sweden before coming over here, and so a lot of people kept seeing him do really good stuff at the junior levels and for the Swedish national team, more so the youth camps, and they thought that something might finally pop for him in his first Moose season. And for a while, it was kind of hard to really see that. Even in his later Sweden stints, especially at the senior levels, it wasn't really seeming like A, he was getting a lot of ice time, and B, that he was really finding a lot of offensive success. And so this first Moose season was pretty bumpy. I think a lot of people didn't really notice him too much, and it wasn't until the end of the year that goal scoring really started to pop off. And you look at some of the goals that he was scoring, some of it seemed like a product of good opportunistic play. Others, maybe a little bit of puck luck finally going his way. And so it's hard for me to get a great sense of what Wagner is yet. He's 21. He's still got some time to hone out his skill set. And again, this was his first season in North America. So I don't know if I want to, read too much into small sample sizes. His goal scoring streak was fun. I think this upcoming season is going to give you a much better sense of whether he can do this kind of play consistently, or if he was more of a brief hot streak and the lack of goal scoring and lack of production is more indicative of what he is down the road. And so, if he does start to round out his game, obviously the Jets could use more skill up and down the lineup. I think that continues to be a theme throughout all of these conversations, is that the Jets just need help from the youth, and they need goal scoring and offensive support everywhere. This team, as it is constructed, is very veteran reliant, and a lot of those veterans haven't been able to really add tons of elite offense the way the Jets probably have asked them to. And so if any of these young wild cards, or maybe the previously ranked top prospects, can really start to find their way, I think that would be a tremendous testament to this team and hopefully their improved scouting departments. I really feel like the past few drafts, they've started to identify some really interesting late bloomers and sleeper picks. Now it's finally time to see if any of them can translate that to NHL success. Curious to know if you think any of these wild card prospects might actually become something. I have some real confidence in at least maybe, two of these guys becoming NHLers. I think one of them, for me, Garrett Brown, probably could even slide into Winnipeg's top 10 rankings at some point. He'll need a little time to marinate, but I do think him and maybe a guy like Wagner or Zilkin could eventually graduate and become something fun. And hey, if Vesalainen decides he wants to come back overseas, let's see if camp this coming August and September holds at least one more surprise for us. But curious to know your thoughts. Drop in the comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Tomorrow's episode, I want to talk a little bit about the Kupari thing and what it may or may not signal about Winnipeg's upcoming offseason. Obviously, this summer is one of the most pivotal in Jets history, and I know that I say that a lot, but this one really is, because we're probably seeing a lot of departures, and already we've seen at least one. So big times ahead for the Jets, but hopefully Winnipeg navigates it with grace and excellence as always. As always, though, appreciate you listening. We will see you back here tomorrow with more Jets offseason coverage. So thanks for listening. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.